Good morning, Rod here at A Better Way to Farm. Very excited to be coming at you today. Our goal every day is to work hard and make you guys more money and to empower you to make better decisions. You often read the quote that knowledge is power, and actually I don't really agree with that. Used knowledge is power. There's a world full of people who are very intelligent and highly educated that make zero difference in the world. Our goal, bring knowledge that is of value that you can implement and turn into profit. So let's say that used knowledge, utilize knowledge as power, and let's go get some today. We're going to spend some time today talking about soil testing, going a little more in depth. Give you fair warning up front. This is probably going to be 30 or 40 minutes long. So you can catch parts of it now or come back and check it later, whatever works for you. And there will come a time when we will be completely open for questions and taking, doing what we can to help with that. So let's get started. We're super excited to be a part of this and talk about soil testing. And as we go here, I think the first thing that we need to talk about is kind of where we come down on, are we grid sampling, are we zone sampling, what are we doing here? I think the question there becomes one of, what are we trying to do? What's our goal? What are we attempting to accomplish? I'm not anti-grid sampling if I can say I'm going to grid sample and I'm going to turn it into profit this way. Now, if someone's charging me a big amount of money to grid sample so they can give me some really cool, pretty maps with lots of colors on them, and it doesn't translate into profit, I'm out. I'm not a fan. I don't see the need. However, I do believe that one of the first things we need to do is get our calcium right all across every field. And grid sampling definitely is a good thing to do there. If we go out and we just randomly spread 3 ton of lime everywhere, the places that were really low still aren't high enough in pH. The places that were already okay and now are too high in pH, and we accomplished basically nothing. So from that standpoint, we would say grid sampling is a good thing. So we're going to pull those grids. We're going to run basically through Midwest Labs, probably the lowest cost test we can run, because the only thing we're really going to try and address is maybe some K and definitely some calcium. And so we'll do that every so frequently to make sure that we're getting that pH where we want it. Beyond that, we can talk about how it is that can we test just by zones. There's a lot of merit in that because we all know we have those irregularities in our field. So for us, for a moment, we're going to use this piece of paper for an awful lot of things. Right now, I'm going to use it to represent an 80, quarter wide, half mile top to bottom. And I'm going to go in here, and I know that I'm planting this north and south, the half mile rows. Knowing what we're going to do with row place starter, I know that whatever I put in the planter at this end of the field is still going to be running when I'm at this end of the field. So what am I going to do? We're going to take this and break it into 20 or no more than 40 acre sections, and we're going to soil test it in the manner in which we're going to plant it. In other words, this 40 on the west, we're going to test that in a great big figure 8. Pulling cores that it's paramount, guys, that those cores be uniform depth. If we're minimum till or no till, probably 6-inch depth. If we're doing a conventional till, more like an 8-inch depth. But the important thing is they all be exactly the same. It really skews the results when they're not the same. Excuse me, I'm battling just a bit of the cold thing here, so I apologize for that, but we're going to carry on anyway. So when we do this, I've shared the story before, but I think it's worth sharing again. I sat down at a truck stop in a booth, and God always puts us in unique positions, and it's a tall booth, and I'm just kind of wanting to eat lunch and be left alone, and who should come in but 2 young men working for a co-op, and they were bragging about the fact that it was not quite 12, it was about 10 minutes till 12, and they were bragging about the fact that they had soil tested 8,000 acres that morning, and they thought they had really done a great thing. I'm going to suggest that if someone thinks they've tested 8,000 acres before lunch, they've done a very poor job. a very poor job. I'm not sure that I can pull in the gate of 160 acre fields and punch one core and get to 8,000 acres. I can't figure out how they did that. Doesn't matter. Here's the thing that matters. We make decisions based on those soil tests. This is a very important thing that we do, and it has to be accurate. Because if we don't do it accurately, then we make bad decisions. So we pull into the 80, we bust it in half, and we do 40 cores. Now, I want one core for every acre, not one core from every acre, and there's a difference. If the gate's here, I'm going to skip. I ain't pulling nothing there. That's where Grandpa started the manure spreader. It's where we kicked on the spreader truck. It's where we've parked the semis. It's been a host of things that we have done that skew that, and it's not accurate reflection of the field. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go out here, walk in a big figure 8 or 2 or 3 figure 8s, pulling those, using a stainless steel probe, going to uniform depth, a brand new clean plastic bucket. We're going to store them with a brand new dowel rod. Some of the things that we see done, they grab an old zinc galvanized 5-gallon bucket. They use a tile spade that has rust on it. So we get an artificial zinc reading, which skews everything else. We get an artificial iron reading, which skews everything else. Stainless steel probe, uniform depth, plastic bucket, brand new dowel rod. Mix well, fill the bag to the stripe where it's full, mark it, put it on the transmittal, and we've got one test done. Now, if we have an anomaly, a sand ridge, it runs crossways through it, we're going to stay out of that. And I do want to test that separate, just to see what I can do. Is it safe to be on the seed right there? Is it checking out all the things that we need to know? But overall, what we're really about is equal opportunity nutrition for every plant all the way down that row. And so consequently, that's why we do what we do in regards to pulling these. Now, it's always interesting because there's a big debate on, well, what lab should I use? We love Midwest Labs. Brent Pullman and his crew out there are fantastic people. They do a great job. They've just recently spent several $1 million updating their lab. They have the most accurate extraction methods known to mankind, and we trust them a great deal. I'm not saying that your lab isn't good. There are different methods of extraction. Sometimes the extraction methods that are utilized are done because they cost less money. So it lets the lab have a bigger margin. Sometimes there's things that can be done that will give artificial readings. We know certain labs that are used because they want to make sure that the person sending the test in, the co-op or whoever, gets to sell the most fertilizer. And so if we artificially inflate that CEC, then we have the need for more fertilizer because we have more holding capacity. And so that would be a way to skew the results. I get a lot of people that they say, well, we don't seed them to get a result to micronutrients. And there's a couple of reasons for that, but first and foremost is how accurate is the extraction method? How accurate is the test? If we don't test it, if we can't quantify it, we can't make predictions on responses. So, I get even some of the people from some other labs, they'll come and sometimes they want to get right in our in our face and say, well, we don't think that micronutrients it's very predictable. And my response to that is, if I was using your extraction methods, I wouldn't have any faith in it either. But if you're using Midwest Labs, and if you're doing the recommendations that they say, the response is going to be there. And so it's important to us to use that lab. Now, I wrote down on my list of things I'm going to do here. I'm going to actually get into what we look at on these tests here in a little bit. But right now I'm going to do a compare and contrast. Remember back in composition class when that teacher made you do that compare and contrast paper and you didn't want to do it? Actually, it's a pretty good practice in life to be accurate and give a fair assessment and compare things. And so the first thing that I want to compare and contrast is to say, who owns the data? In other words, you pull your soil test, you send them into Midwest Labs through our system, they're yours. They're your test. You own that data. We run across growers all the time and they say, hey, so-and-so co-op came and pulled our test. We paid them, we wrote them a check, but we can't get the results. See, the laboratory themselves says that whoever wrote the check to the lab is who owns the data. So if I write a check to the co-op and the co-op writes a check to Midwest Labs says the co-op owns the data, and they won't even give me the data from my own farm. I'm not a big fan of that. And so the question is, who owns it? The second thing is, do we want a paid soil test or do we want a free soil test? Because I run across guys and from time to time they say things like, well, you know, I'm getting a free soil test. Probably not. They may not be sending you a bill that says soil testing, $6,000, but it's in there. There is no free soil test. Somebody's paying the lab to do the work, some a certain amount of money. The question is that test worth what you're paying for it? I'm going to suggest the most expensive soil test in the world is a soil test that's free. I really can't afford a free soil test because I've got to make sure that I'm making great decisions that will help me to do the right thing and be profitable. And that free soil test is probably going to skip a whole bunch of things here that I want to know. I'll get back into that here just in a few minutes. Another thing that I want to know is, am I actually getting a soil test from whoever's doing it, or am I getting a loadout sheet? I am amazed at the number of guys when I say, hey, you're coming to ProAg training, bring your soil test so I can look at them, and they bring me a loadout sheet. It's just a sheet that says this many pounds of P, this many pounds of K. If they're really running with scissors and they're really cutting edge, they might be putting in 4 pounds of sulfur. That is not a soil test. That's just a sheet that says how much fertilizer to put in the truck. A soil test is going to have analytical data on it. The most important part of our test is not page 2. This is the page that's important for me to come and make the recommendations off of, but it's page 1. Because what I need to know is like all of the fact that is here. Karen's wanting me to get this in where we can see it close. I need to know things like, what's the organic matter? Why is organic matter and CEC important? Lots of reasons. Number one, we should be tracking that organic matter. That tells us is what we're doing good or bad. You know, most of the soil here in the Midwest started out with organic matter probably somewhere between 4 and 8%. And now a lot of it is somewhere between 1 and 3%. And that leads us into that whole deal that makes me have a whole nother video called, do we need to send our soil to rehab? No, my soil does not need to go to rehab, but I need to go to rehab. Because if I'm doing something that has taken, if me and my dad and my grandpa have farmed in a manner that has taken our organic matter from 6.5% down to 1.5%, we need to reconsider. We need to say this isn't good. So that needs to be tracked on an annual or at least a biannual basis. We need to know the CEC. What is the cation exchange capacity of our soil? What is our ability to hold nutrients? The higher the number, the bigger the bowl, so to speak, the more we can hold. And so those two numbers are important. Flat out, we need to know, is the organic matter at least a 2 and the CEC at least a 10, because that's the criteria for being safe to row place fertilizer. If we don't have a 2 and a 10, we cannot go on the seed. Now, it can be a 1.5 and a 12, and that works, but there's guidelines there, and shooting from the hip won't serve us. If you have a question, don't be afraid to type it in here. We will do our best to try and get to you throughout this video and answer those questions. Excuse me. So we're looking at organic matter and CEC. The next thing that I'm going to look at is I'm going to look at the big three. I'm going to look at N, P, and K. And in particular, I'm going to dive into the phosphorus pretty hard first. What's the P1 level? What's the P2 level? What's the relationship? Because if that ratio is 1 to 2, we have things working fairly well. If that ratio isn't 1 to 2, then there's something else that's broken, and we got to figure out how we're going to fix it. For instance, I see guys who have a P1 test of 10 and a P2 test of 105. In 3 years, 4 years, that P1 test will move from 10 to 50. A P1 test of 10 has somebody with a dry program trying to sell you a whole gob of fertilizer because they're saying, look, you don't have any available phosphorus. And that's true. Putting on a lot of 1846O or 1152O probably isn't going to fix that either. But if we go in there and we do the things that we should, and we watch that go from 10 to 50, all of a sudden we have an astronomical amount of available phosphorus. The second thing is we know that if the P1 test is above 25 or the P2 test is above 50, there's a 95% likelihood of a positive economic response to using our zinc. I can't speak for anyone else. I only know what our data shows. And I know what our 100% chelated zinc does. So I look at that. I'm going to look at potassium and see what those soil levels are. I'm looking at a test right here. It belongs to one of our buddies out in Nebraska. Tremendous potassium level, 320. And yet, in spite of that, we're pushing him to use a high K fertilizer because we know that we've got to get K into that plant early, long before that soil temperature gets to 65. If we're waiting on 65 degree soil temperature to start shoving K in the plant, we're giving up yield every day. And very few of us are waiting for a 65 degree soil temperature to plant corn. We're going to go ahead and get after it whenever the soil is dry enough and it's right. When we crumble it up in a ball and drop it and it busts, we know we're ready to go for most of us. Then we're going to go down here and look at our secondaries and what level are they at, and look at our micronutrients. One of the very first things that I always gravitate to is I always want to look at sulfur and I always want to look at boron, because those two, like nitrogen, mass flow and tend to run away every year. Boron, boron is a simple thing to look at. It's quite simple. Yes or no? Do I have a boron level that's 0.8 or below? Because if it's below that, I'm suffering yield decrease. And so I want to make sure that it is higher. In all the tests that we look at, less than 1% have an adequate boron level, which means they're suffering yield decrease for that. Guys, I want to encourage you, don't be afraid to ask a question here. Don't be shy. There's 40 people or so watching this, and only you guys live will get to do the questions right now. We'll try and respond to questions later. We fully expect several thousand people to see this over the next 48 hours. And we know there'll be some questions, and we will attempt to get to you as best we can. But don't be afraid to ask some questions. So we're going to look at that boron level, that sulfur level. We're also going to go in and look at all the others like zinc and manganese, iron and copper, and say where are we at, what do we got going here. Base saturations. We definitely want to see those, and this is why it's important that the data not be skewed, because when we change one of those, then we have the others move because their percentage are going to add up to 100. We would ideally like to watch that mag base saturation stay between 12 and 18. When we drop below 12, we have a great propensity to be short in mag, which is really important. It flips those enzyme systems on in the plants. When we start creeping above 18, the soil starts to tighten up. We see mag base saturation rates as high as 30 and 35%. Once they get into that 20 plus range, the soil starts to get really tight. At 30, it's really, really, really hard. And so we want to say, how are we going to address that? You know, what do we need in the way of calcium? What do we need in the way of sulfur to help with that and work through it? Obviously, we want to look at that pH. We had one of the major land grant universities here about 18 months ago. One of the professors wrote an article that said you cannot afford to lime. that was truly written by a man who had a lot of knowledge, wasn't very useful. I tried to read the article and I could not follow how he could draw that conclusion. But guys, when a pH is 5.8, nothing's working right. Chemicals aren't working right. Nutrient uptake isn't working right. The soil health isn't working right. There's nothing that's working correctly. And so getting that pH where we want it, they're in the mid 6s, 6.5, 6.8, is really important. Now for you guys who are fighting the high side of things, and we're going to talk about what we can do on an annual basis to help buffer that. Some of you guys are going to have high pH till the day you die. And we're never going to change that, but we're going to learn how to farm around it and talk about all the things that we can do to make the crop grow better. Another thing that's really important to us is to look at this ratio between potassium and magnesium. I know that all of the buzzword is, and a lot of the people that want to sound super intelligent, they want to talk about, well, what's your calcium magnesium ratio? And I'm kind of like yawning and saying, okay, so what? Number one, we haven't found any way to really fix that very quickly, very cost effectively. And number two is sometimes what we think we know isn't necessarily proven out. It's like, all right, so that isn't what we want it to be, but how can we do it effectively and get money? The ratio we look at is what is the potassium to magnesium ratio, because here's what we know. We know that when potassium exceeds magnesium in parts per million, we are mag deficient in that plant. And we know we can cure that for somewhere between $3.50 and $7 an acre and get really, really big yield responses. And so we're going to look at that. On the base saturation side of things, I don't know. I mean, people say, well, what's ideal? I don't have an ideal thing that I'm looking for. I want the mag between 12 and 18, and we're going to work on that if it isn't. They say, well, your calcium needs to be 80% or 75% or 85%. Trivia question for you. World record dryland corn production, 442 bushels per acre. What was the base saturation of calcium? Do you think it was 85% because that's awesome? You think it's 75% because that's great? You think it's 80 because that was ideal? What if I said the base saturation rate on that field that grew that 442 bushel corn was 54%? Because that's a fact. That's what it was. Excuse me. 54%. So sometimes that which we think we know, now his pH was great, but his base saturation was not what he wanted, but he had really high K levels too, which made the magnesium more important because he had K levels that were off the chart. Everybody's being shy this morning. 40 people watching, nobody asking a question.
There are some questions.
I'm sorry?
There are some questions.
Okay, would you like to, I'm not seeing them, sis. Would you like to share them with me? I was trying to have my computer open here, guys, so that I could get the questions that were coming in, but apparently that wasn't working, and I apologize.
Is pasture fertility worth your time to look at, or just row crops?
I'm sorry, what?
Is pasture fertility worth your time to look at, or just row crops?
I guess it depends on how much you like to make fence. We hate making fence. So there, and we find fence to be very expensive. So consequently, we would say, let's get the most out of every acre. What if instead of running one cow on 5 acres, we're running one cow on 2 acres? So it's just a matter of what we want to do. And we're going to work towards that. And so, yeah, fertility is important on the pastures, and we can make sure we're doing it right, do the soil test, do the things that we need to do. And I would encourage you to take a look at that. That's a very good question. Sis?
Boron with post-chemical program at B3.
Boron, as we know, doesn't translocate. And the more I study it, the more I realize how important it is to do multiple shots. Yes, that is a great way to apply boron, is at V3 with your chemicals. There is no wrong way to put boron on, with the exception of it is wrong to put it in the seed trench. Other than that, it is fantastic to put it on then. We'd like to see some with pre-emerge chemicals or in a 2x2 band. We'd like to see some with every shot of nitrogen. Every time you apply some in, put some boron with it. we would like to see it go on in a foliar feed anytime you're out there. Some of these guys are needing 5 to 7 pints, and it's better to do multiple shots because the more times we put it on, the better off we are, and the more response we can get. So that would be our goal there. But yeah, that's a fine time and a fine way to put it on. Karen?
Patrick asked what a good soil test costs or what he should be paying. He was quoted $1.50 per acre for 40-acre quadrants.
Let's just say that we have a young man that would love to come and pull those for you, do them start to finish, give you our recommendations. To answer your question, our tests are $22 a piece plus whatever the cost of getting them pulled. Now, if someone else is pulling them, then obviously they're going to have to be paid for that, and we're going to have to take a look at what we got to do there to pay Dan or whoever it is. We have a fine young man who's more than happy to come and do those for you. We would love to have him come and talk to you and pull those tests. But they're $22 a test plus the pulling cost. Typically, so that's about, on a 40-acre quad, you're looking at just a shade, about 60 cents. And then Dan's probably going to get another $3 or something. So I guess that would probably be a little better to go this way, perhaps. Go ahead, Karen.
Matt Churchill says he's asking for a friend. He wants to know if 2% K and 20% magnesium saturation. Can you help?
Well, Matt, thank you for being so kind to your friend. I appreciate that. Yes, of course we can help. K levels are important, and we know that. And how are we going to drive them up? The best way is to force feed the K into the plant. That means use a 318-18. That means use double aught 25-17 to get that potassium shoved in there, and leave it. Leave that potassium in the residue. It's very hard to build K if we're baling or chopping residue. If we're not doing that, we can build those levels. And obviously, mag as a base saturation is going to go down just because the others go up. So when we raise that K from 2 to 5, we're going to shave some off of somewhere, and that's the most common place to pull it off of.
Tom asked what an average CEC was and a good number for organic matter.
Tom, that's a fair question. We really want to see that organic matter as a minimum above 2. Now, we see guys that have blow sand and it's 0.2. We see guys that are all over the place. But our goal is to get to 2 as fast as we can. And I will tell you this, one of the first experiences we had where we made a concerted effort to fix that, we were working with a grower named Jerry, and Jerry started out with an organic matter of 1.0%, and it took us 5 years to get him to 2. And you say, well, that's a long time. Yes, but all of the people in Jerry's area still had, 5 years later, their organic matter was still 1.0. And so by working at this, we can build that roots. We can do a lot of things to leave behind residue. Obviously, cover crops can help us with that too. This was pre-cover crop, and we were able to do it then. And so, yes, we can help build that up. In regards to an average CEC, there's no such thing. You know, I'm sitting here looking out the window past the camera at rolling hills in southern Iowa. All this ground, God created this ground to grow cattle, not corn. Our CECs here are 11 and 12 on ground that's been nothing but pasture forever. And, then we get up into some of those muck soils, their CECs are 30 or 40%. So, yeah, there's no such thing as an average. All we can do is work on the organic matter and then see where we go from there. Karen? No other questions right now. All right. So, as we look at our second page, and let me say this, guys. Karen, when we zoom in here, I want to look at, is it catching your right side, my left side?
Yeah.
Because here's the deal. A lot of companies, they get your soil tests and they hold you hostage. I don't like being kidnapped. They run your tests through their system. The only recommendations you get are their system. What you were looking at on page 1 says you're never going to use a product from us. You're just going to do what you did last year and use a dry program we make the recommendations. Right here on this soil test, this guy needed 80 pounds of phosphate, 9 pounds of zinc, 7 pounds of manganese, 2.8 pounds of copper, and 2.3 pounds of boron in a dry broadcast application. So you have that choice. We don't hold you hostage at all. Excuse me. Number 2, though, let's go to the second page and let's talk about our recommendations. When we look at our recommendations, we're going to make a recommendation for a specific starter fertilizer in furrow. We needed 5 gallons of 9-18-9. This particular field needed 1.3 pints of zinc, 1.7 pints of manganese, 2.0 pints of copper, 6.1 pints of boron. Obviously recommend guarding into the nitrogen. This is to grow 275 bushel corn. Guys, in addition to that, this test, because this is in an area where they have never, ever addressed micronutrients, in addition to that, they needed an additional 7.6 pounds of zinc, 6.1 pounds of manganese, and 0.8 pounds of copper. Now we're going to turn those pounds into pints and figure out how to put those on either in a strip till, a 2x2 band, or a foliar feed. The great news is this test is a year old. His micronutrient need went down substantially. Let's talk about what a good soil test does, a really good one, and the system. We recently talked to a grower who shared a story with us that we had not heard previous to this, till last weekend. And he come to us and he said, look, I was using, and he named a dry fertilizer company, a big dry fertilizer company. I was doing exactly what they said. And I went with you in 2017 and I saved $100 per acre up front. $100 an acre up front. Now, if we're borrowing money at 6%, all of a sudden that means we saved $106 because we didn't have to borrow money for a year. So we saved $106 an acre on input costs. That's what a good soil test should do. It should pay for itself because we stop doing things we don't need and do the things we do need. And when we do that, in addition, he had the best crop he'd ever had. So we help you on both ends. It's going to help us because we're going to cut down our input costs. Simultaneously, we're going to raise our yield so it doubles down on what we have. Guys, we love what we do. Do we have any other questions, Karen? Is there anybody that's got a question? Hit us right now because I'm getting ready to wrap us up here. I apologize for the coughing. Guys, knowledge is power if used. That's what we do here at A Better Way to Farm. Our whole deal is to empower you to make good decisions. To say, here's why we do what we do. To have you be able to ask people questions and say, tell me why you want to do that. It's my money and it's my farm. Tell me why I should do that. I'm going to leave Sunday afternoon, head for Ankeny. I'm looking super forward to being there. It's going to be great. I hope to see some of you guys up there. I'm going to leave here Wednesday and go to Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm going to see a bunch of our friends out there. I'm stoked about that. And all these guys are going to leave there more powerful because they're going to have more knowledge that they can use to determine their future. Why do we want to leave our entire financial future in the hands of someone else? In the hands of someone who strictly has a vested interest in making sure we buy something. Make no mistake, guys, we hope to do business with you. We want you to buy from us. But more importantly, we want you to be profitable. And we want you to know why you're doing what you're doing. Because here's what I know. The things that we do today, the recommendations that Karen and Nick and Rod and all the others on the team give, we're impacting your unborn grandchildren or your unborn great-grandchildren. And whether or not they get to farm has a lot to do with how well we do this. So let's do this really well, because the thing that our whole life is about is leaving the right legacy. And I hope that's what you're after too. Guys, it's been a pleasure to spend the last 36 minutes with you. I hope that you found this beneficial. Give us a shout out, one thing that you learned or one thing that you liked about the video. Post up something here. And if you're interested in attending one of these next 2 meetings, give us a call, 641-919-1206, or hit us up with a message right here on the page. I hope you have a better Saturday.